The House Oversight Committee will come to order. Mr. Clerk, please take attendance.
Chair Johnson.
Here.
Representatives Outwood. Here. Hoytiga. Riley.
Here.
O'Malley.
Here.
Wozniak.
Here.
Rixey.
Here.
LeGrand. Young.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you for that. Representative Outman moves to adopt the minutes from the October 14, 2021 committee meeting. Seeing no objection, the minutes are approved. All right, today's agenda is we're going to be hearing testimony regarding the Benton Harbor water crisis. This is an issue that kind of really came to light in the last couple of weeks here. Just want to clarify, for the purposes of today's committee, is just kind of figure out what happened. We've got the director of Eagle, we've got the mayor of Benton Harbor here, just kind of run through some things that's happened, what are the next steps going forward. This is not the platform for any political grandstanding. If you want to do that, go do a press conference outside. Today's mission is purely to gather the facts and to see what can be done in the future to make sure something like this doesn't happen. I'm sure that we are all in agreement that everyone should have clean drinking water. That's the hopes out of this committee. So with that, I would like to invite the director to come on up. I want to thank you for agreeing to this on very short notice. If you could introduce yourself and your colleague with you. I know you have an opening statement you'll go through, and then we also kind of talked before this. We want to divide this into two sections where let's kind of talk about what happened and do questions on that, and then we'll do kind of a section on what's the next steps going forward, and we'll do questions there. So thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Lisa Clark. I'm Director of Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, also known as EAGLE, not Deagle, not Meagle. Okay, that was my brief commercial. I'm joined by Eric Oswald, who's the head of our Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division, and I'll let Eric introduce himself in just a minute after I do some opening statement. So, we have a rare opportunity today to discuss a goal that everyone in this room shares, ensuring that all 10 million Michigan residents in every corner of our state have access to safe drinking water. We can only imagine, and frankly only imagine, what our fellow Michiganders in Benton Harbor are experiencing. Doubting the safety of the drinking water coming out of their faucets, hassling their way through drinking, cooking, brushing teeth, preparing baby formula out of 16-ounce plastic bottles, and constantly figuring out how many cases of water they'll need to get through the week. And if that burden wasn't enough for Benton Harbor residents, a 20-inch water main broke last night, actually late yesterday afternoon, leaving most residents unable to flush their toilets and without water to bathe, shower, wash their dishes, or clothes. While the conversations we have today about policies and science and administrative solutions are important, it's critical to keep in mind and in the forefront of our mind who we're all here for. We've all shown our commitment to clean drinking water for all Michiganders. The governor's made it a priority since taking her oath, creating the offices of Clean Water Public Advocate and Environmental Justice Public Advocate in one of her first acts in office, putting forth the sweeping My Clean Water Plan, which calls for transformative investments in the aging water infrastructure that is challenging communities across Michigan, joining her fellow Midwestern governors in calling on the federal government to prioritize water infrastructure and backing up her commitment to safe drinking water in every budget she's presented to the state legislature. For your part, you all have adopted budgets in recent years that have made meaningful contribution to the drinking water and other infrastructure investments that are necessary in communities across the state, including Benton Harbor. With that in mind, I hope and believe we can spend our time together today learning and reflecting on how we can all better pursue our common cause of safe drinking water for all. Before welcoming your questions and engaging in open conversation, I just want to take a couple of minutes, as recommended by the chair, to build a foundation of our common purpose by providing a brief summary of this current situation in Benton Harbor, where some homes have shown high levels of lead in their drinking water, updating you on the current status of the state of Michigan response to the corresponding risk to public health, and describing a path ahead to ensuring our 10,000 fellow Michiganders in that community can safely and confidently drink their tap water as soon as possible. Benton Harbor is a strong, majority black city with a rich history. As one of its claims to fame, America's first car was built there by a carriage maker in 1894. As I've spent more time there in recent weeks, I found Benton Harbor to be a remarkable community in the extent to which residents know each other, seem anxious to help out, and welcome outsiders, even when they're from the government. But in some important ways, Benton Harbor is not unique. Like many other similar cities in Michigan and across the country, its population has declined significantly as employees, employers, and people have shifted and moved in recent decades. The city has been left to manage and maintain a century-old water system built for a bigger community with a much smaller population and ratepayer base to share and cover that cost. The problem it currently faces of lead leaching into drinking water is a national issue that is particularly common and pronounced in older communities like Benton Harbor, with outmoded lead service lines and other fixtures and inadequate resources to address these challenges. Michigan is aggressively looking for and aggressively addressing these legacy challenges. We adopted the most protective lead and copper rule of any state in the nation in 2018, a rule that survived a lawsuit challenging it as too aggressive. With its new, improved sampling protocols and more stringent standards, we knew the new rule would result in more community water systems exceeding the existing lead thresholds. But we should all agree that's a good problem to have because it means we're looking, we're identifying problems, and we're taking action more quickly to protect Michigan families. And after all, that's the purpose of the law and our job as public servants. Many Michigan communities have exceeded the action level for lead since the revisions to the lead and copper rule were first implemented in 2019. But the situation in Benton Harbor is unique and more urgent with environmental justice implications. As you know, that community has now experienced action level exceedances for 3 consecutive years, whereas most communities with ALEs, action level exceedances, bring lead levels back under the thresholds within 1 or 2 testing periods after taking prescribed actions. Additionally, testing from Benton Harbor households has yielded particularly high results in a small number of homes. The percentage of homes sampled with elevated lead levels does not set the community apart. Many communities across the country are currently dealing with lead exceedance, but the troubling high readings from Benton Harbor suggest significant risk for some families. In response to that public health risk, Governor Whitmer signed an executive directive last week to ensure a whole-of-government approach to provide access to safe drinking water right now and work tirelessly to replace every lead service line in Benton Harbor as soon as possible. EGLE and DHHS are partnering with the city, the county, community groups, and residents with an all-hands campaign to distribute bottled water at centralized pickup locations and through deliveries to homes, apartments, schools, senior centers, and other places where it's needed. The state and our local partners are also engaged in a No Stone Unturned campaign to educate residents about lead in their drinking water and the steps that they should take to protect themselves and their families. Building from ongoing outreach and communication efforts, this ramped-up approach includes speaking with residents, passing out of literature at water distribution sites, a soon-to-be-launched radio, mobile, and social media blitz, daily engagement with community leaders, from the mayor and the city manager to faith leaders and community advocates. While providing bottled water is the current focus, State of Michigan partners are also working with US EPA on its forthcoming study to ensure that the wealth of scientific research on certified water filters, which has validated their near universal effectiveness in removing lead, holds up to the testing specifically focused on Benton Harbor's community drinking water. We hope this study will result in restored community confidence in water filters, which are an important component of our long-term drinking water, safe drinking water strategy. So moving forward, we must recognize that our shared goal of safe drinking water for all Benton Harbor residents will not be achieved until we get all the lead pipes out of the ground. All the testing confirms that the water coming out of the city's drinking water plant leaves the plant without lead in it. High lead level tests in Benton Harbor homes result from the water picking up the lead on its way as it moves to the faucets through the service lines and other plumbing that contains lead. That basic truth is the same for every or nearly every community and home in Michigan with elevated lead drinking levels. Removing the lead pipes is likewise nearly always the answer. Of course, adding to the complexity is the challenge of resident plumbing, which is another reason why filters protect people. The only question is how fast we can all work together in our various roles to get the lead out. Our new strongest in the nation lead and copper rule requires the removal and replacement of lead service lines in our state over time. As I mentioned earlier, our state has put resources into that effort in recent years, and we've made identifying significantly more funding a top priority for the past 2.5 years. So we have the policy and the fiscal foundation to build upon. But as we all agree, the situation in Benton Harbor is urgent and inexcusable. We cannot ask our 10,000 fellow Michiganders who call that community home to patiently wait for safe drinking water. The governor's committed to addressing the situation in the next 18 months through the immediate measures in her executive directive, the provision of bottled water as a near-term measure, and her commitment to replacing all lead service lines in the city during that time frame. Eagle will stop at nothing to do our part in fulfilling that commitment, and I trust all of you and your colleagues in the State House and Senate will do the same. Thanks for your time and attention. I look forward to your questions. I'm going to take a second and let Eric introduce himself to you.
Good morning. I'm Eric Oswald. I'm the Director of the Drinking Water and Environmental Health Division at Eagle. I've been in that role for about 4.5 years, since May of 2017. In that role, I lead about 165 dedicated, professional, and passionate individuals that oversee the public water systems in the state, the over 10,000 public water systems in the state. We've been very active in Benton Harbor for the last 3 years, and I can show you that today. I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you want me to give an update on the water main break in Benton Harbor. I'll give you a little bit of my background, just gee whiz stuff. I spent 28.5 years in the United States Air Force as an engineer, working on infrastructure across the country and across several other nations. I'm very experienced with drinking water and infrastructure systems. When I retired in 2017, I was looking for a challenge. Applied for the drinking water position and was lucky enough to get it. And I will tell you that the people I work with in the state are every bit as passionate, dedicated, and professional as the individuals I worked with for almost 29 years in the United States Air Force and military, and I'm proud to work with them.
Thank you for being in the Air Force. I was an Air Force guy myself, so
Thank
those
you.
are good credentials. If you could briefly just say where the status of the water main break, obviously when we scheduled this hearing, that was before that happened. Just briefly, what's the status of that?
Yeah, they had a 20-inch line break, which is a large line. It dewatered about 70% of the Benton Harbor system. They spent all last night trying to dewater the hole that they dug in the street to get to the water main. They couldn't dewater it. They found this morning that there was a broken irrigation line from a nearby golf course that was flooding that line, or flooding that hole. They were able to isolate that. Currently, the hole is dry. They've isolated the break to the underside of the pipe, unfortunately, so they've got to dig a little bit bigger of a hole. They're hoping within the next 2 hours that they'll have that hole dug and have the clamp applied to the pipe. They believe that the materials they have on site will fix the leak. After that occurs, the city will very carefully repressurize the system so as not to cause any other breaks or other issues in the system, and that'll probably take 3 to 4 hours. So very optimistically, we hope sometime this afternoon we can store water pressure in the Benton Harbor system.
Okay, thank you for that update. If you could, for the committee, just kind of go through a brief timeline of the lead reports that kind of got us here, starting with the first report, maybe the corrosion efforts that were taken. There's a couple different ones, maybe the differences between them. You just kind of run through that for us.
Sure, I can go over the timeline very quickly here. In 2018, we did a sanitary survey. We're required to do those every 3 years on our larger water system. So we conducted a sanitary survey. We were in the works of getting those findings to the city and resolving those when they experienced an action level exceedance in October of 2018. So that action level was the first in Benton Harbor's history since 1991-92 timeframe when they first started testing. This is the first time they've exceeded the action level. The system has never had corrosion control before because they've never exceeded the action level. That's the trigger for corrosion control. So in 2018, we had the action level exceedance. Eagle engineers met with the mayor and the city manager, charted out a pathway forward, a very aggressive pathway forward. We had selected a corrosion control chemical and engineered a spot in the plant to inject the chemical and flow pace it. The plant was never designed to receive the corrosion control chemical, so it was a bit of a challenge to do that. So in March of 2019, we started treating the water in Benton Harbor with a corrosion control chemical. That was a polyphosphate blend, a 70-30. I don't want to get too far down in the weeds, but we chose that particular chemical because we looked around and saw that other cities that used Lake Michigan water as a source and had similar treatment trains that Benton Harbor did were effective in using that particular chemical to passivate their system. So that's the reason that particular chemical was chosen and started in March. So we got that installed in less than three months there. with the city from the time that the action level occurred. We continued testing the city for lead and copper tests. The city had a lot of difficulties getting the required 60 samples for the first 2 monitoring periods subsequent to the action level exceedance. They fell short of that and received a monitoring violation because they only collected around 36 samples and then 42 of the required 60 samples. So we continued to sample through 2019. The city continued having action level exceedances. We looked at the results of the water system testing and the water quality parameters we were seeing and saw that the chemical persistence of the orthophosphate in the distribution system wasn't what we wanted. So we increased the dose in February of 2020. We changed to a 90-10 blend, more orthophosphate, less polyphosphate in the water. And that's what they've been doing since 2020, and it's shown some improvement. I will tell you, these systems take a long time to passivate. When you don't have corrosion control in your drinking water, you don't have any coating on the pipe. So it takes a while for this chemical to get out there. We're talking 1 part, 1.5 parts, 2 parts per million of this phosphate chemical. So it takes a while to passivate the system. So in the meantime, we worked with our Health and Human Services counterparts. They provided filters for the city and other alternate water for target populations there. So we also held a lot of public hearings. I think in February we had a public hearing or a public meeting in Benton Harbor of 2019. So we have been very aggressively managing that testing program and the water quality monitoring program in the distribution system. We are starting to see some good improvement in this last monitoring period, so we're hopeful that corrosion control chemical is taking effect and will start showing improvement. What we've noticed, though, in the last couple of monitoring periods is that first liter sample that we take that shows what's going on in the home's plumbing has continued to be elevated. So we're concerned about fixtures in people's homes, old brass fixtures and potentially lead fixtures in people's homes that we need to address as well. So that's kind of an overview of where we've been in the last 3 years. We've been meeting on a weekly, daily basis with the city and with our counterparts at EPA and Health and Human Services to manage this issue. So
if I can just add a couple of high-level things. I think the important thing to understand is this is from the Eagle perspective. So we are the regulators. We have regulatory authority over the public water systems, and so that's what we're addressing. There are also important overlays using our offices, Environmental Justice Public Advocate, Clean Water Public Advocate, and then what we're representing to you here is not also including of the local health department work, the city work, the DHHS work, et cetera. So what you can see from all of this too is that there's an escalating response and a need for urgency, which is why we're all talking about making sure that we're getting the lead out as fast as possible and that you can see this commitment to removing those lead service lines. Because as you can hear from Eric in the discussion about the corrosion control, the right solution is to get the lead service lines out.
So I just want to make sure we're clear here. So you would say the water is not safe to drink currently?
So the state of Michigan is providing bottled water to the residents of Benton Harbor, which is a weird silver lining today with the water main break, because we have been providing bottled water. We are working with EPA to understand how filters interact with the specific chemistry of the Benton Harbor water system. And if you want me to go any deeper, that's all Eric. And so we're working with them to do that. We hope to be transitioning people to filters as quickly as possible.
Okay, but to my original question there, would you say the water for the residents of Benton Harbor, is it safe for them to drink the water or not?
That's why the state of Michigan is providing bottled water and working to transition them to
I'm looking
filters
for
as
a yes
quickly
or
as
no.
possible.
Is it safe to drink the water in Benton Harbor right now or not?
The state of Michigan wants citizens to be drinking bottled water.
So you don't think the water there is safe to drink?
The state of Michigan wants, this is a determination made by
This is-
DHHS.
Come on. Let's just talk like normal people here. It's a normal question. Is the water in Benton Harbor safe to drink or not?
Yes, no, it's not. People should be drinking bottled water.
Okay. You have been doing these corrosion treatment things. You're saying the numbers are starting to go down in your opinion?
we've seen some improvement in some of the numbers that we're seeing. So the number of non-detects has more than doubled. That's good, but we still see occasional high numbers, and you can't predict what's going to happen at any one individual home, which is why we're acting with caution in Benton Harbor.
So, and this is, I'm not part of this world, right? So I'm trying to understand here. Back late 2018, you get the first high lead level. And then 2019, you begin the corrosion treatment program. The level, or pretty much say, I think it went up a little bit. And so you have 6 reporting periods where it's above the actionable level, but yet within the last month is when we kind of had the, telling people in Benton Harbor, hey, here's water, here's bottled water. Why, if the water is unsafe to drink now, why did we wait until now? Was it
We
not
didn't
unsafe
wait
2
until
years
now.
ago?
There's been communication all along, and what we've heard from community members and community leaders is it's not enough, which is why you're seeing the escalated all-hands-on-deck response.
So 2 years ago, the residents in Benton Harbor were told the water's not safe to drink.
So well, Eric, I'll let you talk about our role.
Yeah, they were advised. There was public education that went out that said, hey, there's potential high lead levels in your drinking water in Benton Harbor. So DHHS and we put together what we call the public education language that attempts to educate the public on the dangers of lead exposure and provide some information on how they can reduce their potential exposure. DHHS was providing filters through a local organization, and as the director mentioned, we've learned in the last few months that those efforts weren't as widespread as they should have been, and that's why the doubling down of the effort to make sure we get the word out and make sure that people have access to alternate water in the city.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems in the last 30 days, people have been told, hey, don't drink the water. If you need to use water for cooking, for drinking, or for formula, use bottled water. Were they being told that last year or 2 years before? I mean, it's part of that public education campaign. What were they being told?
They were being told to flush. We've seen that flushing your water for 5 minutes is very effective at reducing lead levels because those lead levels tend to elevate when the water's been stagnant overnight. To flush, to filter, and if you have a sensitivity or you are you've got some issues that make lead exposure an acute health risk for you, that you should use a filter or use bottled water.
Why is that not acceptable now to just flush the water? I guess this is my biggest problem. I understand in 2018 you get the first report, the levels are high. In most communities where you have this happen, you do a corrosion treatment program and then they're back to acceptable levels. And so that's what you tried. It didn't work. The system's old. There's some issues there. We go several reporting periods, and there's still no change. And now in the last 30 days, all of a sudden, it feels like we're going from 0 to 100 miles an hour here from we're monitoring, we're working on some things to, holy cow, you can't drink this water. What changed in the last 30 days? Because it feels like the numbers haven't changed at all. Am I missing something here?
No, I think there was some concern. There was an issue in Newark, New Jersey, where there was some formation of nanoparticles of lead that were able to bypass the filters. That only happens in a specific water chemistry. EPA is pretty sure, and again, pretty sure is not good enough, that the water chemistry in Benton Harbor does not create those formation of nanoparticles, but they want to do a study before we go back and say the filters are absolutely positively effective. They want to make sure that the water chemistry in Benton Harbor isn't forming those nanoparticles as it did in Newark, New Jersey, and being able to bypass those filters. So I think that's why you're seeing an elevated level of concern about using filters, and until we can validate that the filters are absolutely effective, we want to make sure we're cautious there. We've seen every filter study and every filter result we've gotten in the state of Michigan has been shown that they're 100% effective. But we don't want to say that if we're not 100% sure that something's, and again, each water system is its own thing. It's every water chemistry is different, so you don't know until you actually go and test. So that's why the experts at EPA are going to do a validation study of the filters in Benton Harbor so we can assure citizens that these particles aren't being formed like they were in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay. We've talked to some residents of Benton Harbor. What they're telling us, the reason for the change is, I'm sure you're well aware, there's a petition to the EPA. They're saying nothing happened until we filed this petition, and that's the cause of it. Is that not true? Or did that have some impact on this?
You know, I'm not going to say that's not true, but we've been very active in Benton Harbor for the last 3 years. As I said, we've been working very diligently, more aggressively than the law dictates and than the lead and copper rule dictates, to get this treatment in place and to keep monitoring.
I think an important thing to understand too, and I know you've got some other speakers, it's a complicated system in Benton Harbor. You can hear Eric talk about the detail of the water system itself, and I know that, you know, as I was sharing in my opening statements, you know, there are challenges within the city itself, and the work, it's a tough job that the mayor has and that the city administration has. And so, you know, it's, I hate to answer it with it's complicated, but it is a situation that's complicated.
It is, and I was trying to do my research on it. Look, I don't know whether you do the 70% blend or the 90%, you know, the 1.0 milligrams per liter or 3.0, but just the simple, I'm just a simple guy, and I look at it and go, what changed? It seemed like it was pretty steady. The numbers kind of, they're always above the level, but then within the last 30 days, there's been just a massive shift coming from the department in the city, and I'm not seeing what caused that, I guess. So I'm still trying to figure that out, but I don't want to take all the time, so Representative Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. I just had a couple of questions. Goes back a conversation, but I just want you all to let us know what's the age of that line that broke when you were giving us the update? Because I just need to know that.
That's a great question, Representative, and I asked Eric the exact same thing, so I'll let him.
I'm not sure I've got the answer yet. I asked my staff the age because they just exposed it, but we know some of the water mains in Benton Harbor are up to 80, 100 years old. And that's another issue. We talk a lot about lead service lines, but we also have acute issues when these mains break and the system depressurizes, and you can get bacteria in the system, or you can have a backflow situation where a business that has a chemical treatment going on inside the business and not adequate backflow protection, when the system depressurizes, those chemicals can get into the drinking water system. So there's a lot of concern about water mains and aging water infrastructure in the city. So I'll check my emails and see if I've got an answer back for you so I can tell you exactly how old that may
But
be.
we're sure it's probably around 80 years. It's probably the youngest, the youngest of
Imagine
the
if we were
line.
driving on 8-year-old roads.
Yeah, and I know that.
Put our water through that.
Right, but that's what we know. We got a lot of work to do. Additional question? Thank you so much. So we've been talking about the what is it called? Let's see here, because I'm getting caught up to speed on all this technology and the language too. But the one thing I want to talk about is the lead and coppice rule and how the legislature changed that. And so, how have you seen that really working? It sounds like it's doing a good job in identifying, right? And you guys mentioned something about this pre-flushing. So when we're having these issues, you want to run your water. And how long have people been doing that as it relates to this lead copper rule? Were we advising people to do that before, and now we're advising them to do it again? I just want to be clear. I'm brand new. Thank you.
It's a tricky question about the flushing. You don't want to flush in anticipation of testing for the lead and copper rule, because you've got to let that water stagnate. We want to get a worst case scenario where the water's been sitting in contact with those lines for at least 6 hours. So we absolutely do not want people that are doing the lead and copper testing in their homes flushing those lines before they test. However, before people get up and make a cup of coffee or do anything, you need to flush your line. I mean, that's been consistent. We need to double down on our efforts to get that message out there. You run your water until you feel the temperature change, which means you're into water that's been out in the distribution main. There is, I'm not aware of any system in the state of Michigan that has lead in its distribution system. Lead is only in the service lines and in the interior plumbing. So there's no lead coming into that service line until it sits in that service line overnight. Michigan's new lead and copper rule is very aggressive. It used to be a first liter sample only. Now we require a first and a fifth. The first gets you what's been sitting in that fixture. The fifth takes you out to that service line. So we've been missing that in the past. That water that's been sitting stagnant in that service line overnight, that can pick up a lot of lead, and that's been demonstrated. We've had various communities that have had an action level exceedance only because of that 5th liter sample. So that's increased the number of exceedances that we've had. We've also cracked down on pools, sampling pools. In the past, you could do 50% lead service line homes, 50% copper with lead solder in it. We've eliminated that. You've got to have, all your samples have got to come from homes, the tier 1 homes, if you have them, that are single family homes serviced by a lead service line. We've also required all of our systems to go out there and do a complete distribution system materials inventory so they know where these lead service lines are. When the lead and copper rule came out in the 90s, systems got enough of a sample to know they could meet their 30 or 60 sample requirements. So that's all the inventory they did, and they stopped. We saw in Flint and other communities when things changed, they weren't positive they were getting these samples from the most the most likely exposures of lead in their community. So the inventory is meant to overcome that as well. So we've made a lot of rules to make this very, very aggressive, along with the requirement to remove 5% of your lead service lines every year, so we can get rid of this source of poison in a 20-year period.
Okay.
One quick one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I'm just curious to know about this testing. Is there any priority given to households with small children? And then that's my last question.
The only priority we give is to single-family homes. There's a tiering system. So Tier 1 is single-family homes served by a lead service line. Tier 2 gets into businesses and others that are served with a lead service line. So the only priority is given. You've got to take those samples at the highest tier possible. So as we see in Flint, where they're eliminating lead service lines, we're down to Tier 2, a lot of Tier 2 sites, and you could go down to Tier 3 sites, which would be, just a home with a copper line or an apartment complex or something like that. But yeah, we highly encourage everyone to get their home tested for lead, and DHHS helps out with that a lot. They're a very good partner to have. When we have exceedances, when we have a home that tests over 15 parts per billion, we automatically send that information to DHHS. They follow up with the homeowner to do more testing in the home to figure out where that lead's coming from and to help them abate that exposure.
Yeah, so if I can follow up, so Eric's describing the sampling protocol, and then also by the comment about DHHS following up when there are homes that are at a higher level. Some of the other things that we're doing, to your question for people, is we're working with DHHS to make lead testing either free or reduced for the citizens of Benton Harbor right now. And one of the reasons I struggle with the question of, can you drink the water is for precisely this reason. Our work is on the distribution system. The question of what's coming out of your tap is different. Citizens should be testing what's coming out of their tap, and we do everything in our power to help them get the materials that they need in order to do that. But I can't answer what's coming out of the tap here in the Hob. I can't tell you the quality of that. What our job is to talk about the quality of the distribution system. So I just want to make that point.
So you kind of brought up the lead line replacements. The enhanced rules now say 7% has to be replaced every year after that initial elevated finding. We don't see that occurring in the numbers that we've seen. It seems like they're under the 7%. Explain, how is that not really enforced? Is that just kind of a guideline, or is that an actual requirement?
The 7% is still there, but it's only after the actions. If we take the action to install corrosion control treatment, if that action doesn't bring their action levels down, then that 7%. And Benton Harbor's at that point right now where that 7% has now kicked in. So we'll be requiring them to remove 7% of their lines.
At what day did that start, I guess?
That would start on the 30th of September, so 1 October.
Of this year?
Of this year.
This has been going on for almost 3 years, and it's just now starting?
Yes, the increased 7%.
Okay. I'll have to reread the rules. I feel like that's not the case. It was supposed to start sooner.
It depends on when you define that. This is the nuances of the rules. When we install the corrosion control, you've got to give that a chance to work. We give the systems some time for that corrosion control to work. If after that corrosion control doesn't work, then that 7% kicks in. So we can look at where you decide that corrosion control wasn't working and where you mark that line.
I believe it was March of 2019 that we started the corrosion control program. That's
correct.
2.5 years ago.
And then we adjusted it in 2020 because we saw it wasn't being effective. So it depends on when you draw that line.
But then if you just keep adjusting it, could you say, well, we're just always adjusting? I mean, at some point you have to say you got to start replacing lines.
At some point you've got to call it, and that's what we've done. We've adjusted it again.
And I know every line's different. What's a ballpark number, the cost to replace one line?
We estimate about $5,000
$5,000, okay.
per line.
Thank you. Representative O'Malley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just have, I think, a couple of quick questions here as I'm becoming an expert on this in the last half hour. And I guess I just start by saying, as I listen to this and I think about my family, and when this discussion happens, we can talk about this percentage or that percentage, but if I'm the one who's turning on the tap, I don't want to seem insensitive, but these are obviously questions that can be asked. So just real quick, do you have a guesstimate as to the percentage of homes in Benton Harbor that are in this situation? Is it 50-50? Is it 80-something? It's just
I couldn't even speculate because it's we see in our lead testing that the results vary from time to time in the same home, and your neighbor could have the same situation you have. And we can see very different lead releases. It's very problematic and it's very sporadic how this lead gets released, which is part of the problem.
Okay. And then I guess, is most of the problem in the distribution lines, or is it also the lines from, the street to the house, to the sink?
It's only from the street to the house. It's from the water main to the line that carries, which we call a service line, carries that water from the main into your house.
Okay.
If that line is constructed of lead, which a lot of them are in Benton Harbor, that's where when the water sits there, it can, if there's no coating between that lead, and what the phosphate does is it just puts a coating. You've seen hard water in your home coats it with calcium. This is the same thing.
So-
It prevents lead from coming.
So most of the infrastructure of the municipality is lead-free.
Correct.
It's a home issue. Okay. Then I guess another question, and I sucked in chemistry in school, so when you talk about this stuff that you're putting in the water that kind of covers the pipes, if that helps bring it down, does that buy more time?
It potentially makes it reduces the exposure for
Okay.
lead. But we've seen in other circumstances that it only takes one mistake to strip that coating away. Or we've seen that seismic activity, in other words, a crew comes out and breaks up the road in front of your home, the action of them destroying that asphalt can shake that coating loose. And that coating contains lead, so when that coating comes loose, it goes into the home and you can get lead particles, phosphate, in combination with lead. So, yeah.
And
you
all
can
these
see that.
questions, help underscore why the solution is to get rid of the lead service lines.
Absolutely.
The challenge being that this is a really expensive proposition, close to $2 billion for the entire state. And so you can see why communities, when they look at the lead and copper rule, want to understand, are there ways that there are financial opportunities to help them? Again, a great reason that we're having this conversation going into, how you all want to spend the ARP dollars.
And again, we appreciate the support that we've gotten from the legislature. We got a $9.5 million grant in 2018. $284,000 of that went to Benton Harbor. This was before any action level exceedances for a pilot for them to inventory their system and to try and start removal of lead service lines. That was well before the action level exceedance.
And then real quick, and then I'll be done. Explain to me water chemistry. You say it can be different in certain areas. I mean, if it's all coming out of Lake Michigan, how does that work?
It depends on the treatment. The coagulant that you use, it changes the pH. It changes the amount of sulfates and chlorides in the water, and that ratio can improve water corrosivity or it can damage it. And I like to say drinking water systems are the grumpy old men of our infrastructure. They don't like any change.
So
you've got to be very careful about how you change, because what you do to solve one problem can create another problem.
So that's not necessarily a problem of Lake Michigan water. It's a problem of the chemists that are at any one municipality.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, how they treat the water.
Thank you.
Representative Brixey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director, for coming to talk to us about this incredibly important issue that we have before us. How often have you been meeting with the City of Benton Harbor, over the past year?
Well, Eric's team meets weekly or more than weekly in many situations.
For over a year, you've been meeting weekly
Probably
about
for
this?
For probably 2 or 3 years. We've been meeting internal
Okay.
to Eagle every week, every Thursday at 2 o'clock for at least the last year and a half to go over status of Benton Harbor.
Okay, thank you so much for your diligence. I'm so happy to see that that Michigan's lead and copper rule went into effect, because we're seeing some sort of we're hearing comments about timing, and yet the timing of all of this is because the lead and copper rule is working as it's supposed to, right? During the Snyder administration,
Representative, we are not going to do political grandstanding. I told you that. All right? I'm not out here saying this is Whitmer's Flint water crisis. All right? We're here to find out what happened. Keep your comments tailored to that. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Prior to the current method of testing, the old method of testing before 2019, we weren't detecting lead in the levels because of the flushing that we were doing, correct?
I won't say it's because of the flushing. It was because of the 1st and 5th liter sampling. That flushing prohibition has always been in place. However, we never want to discourage a home from flushing or cleaning their aerator. So you see the problem there. We want you to flush every day, but okay, before you take your lead and copper rule, let your water sit and don't flush it, take that sample and then flush afterwards. I think that the important thing, the important change is the tightening of the pools where you go sample and the methodology of that 1st and 5th liter sample. It's important to note for transparency that Benton Harbor's first action level exceedances occurred under the old 1st liter draw sample system. So.
Okay, so if the only long-term solution that we have is to get the lead pipes out of the water system, and you talked about that being a $2 billion project, right? So for big picture that we're looking at, we're looking at oversight of you, but your job is just to tell someone they have a problem. You don't get to give them the money to fix the problem that they have, right? That's our job as lawmakers here. The legislature is the one that has the ability to direct funds to the communities to fix this problem, right?
Yeah, that's true. We don't come with a pot of money. We tell them, we call strikes and balls, and we tell them where their problems are and tell them to fix it.
Right, and so, but we're telling them to fix it, right? And you can't create the tax base in a community to fix it, right? And you're going to go into a community like Benton Harbor, where the poverty rate is 45% of the population is living below the federal poverty line. And so the people who pay for the water, the way our system works here in Michigan is that the people who use the water have to pay for all of it. And so suddenly we have people who have water that isn't really safe for them to consume unless they're doing something to it, like flushing or putting filters on or something like that. And yet they're the ones that are supposed to pay to replace 80 to 90-year-old lines, and half of them are living in poverty. Like how could the department, if you had a magic wand and you could wave, what would your budget be, and how would you change the system so that you could really not just monitor it but fix it?
So, we are very open to having conversations about that regulatory oversight. We are creatures of statute, so we do what's in the statute, and would be glad to have discussions about, where do you think things need to be tightened up from an LCR perspective. I also want to point out that lead is not the only problem with our water systems. We're sitting here having this conversation with the challenge of the water main break that's ongoing in Benton Harbor right now too, which is demonstrative of the fact that we can get all the lead service lines out, then we also need to deal with fixtures in people's homes, as well as other challenges that cities and communities face to their water infrastructure. I don't have a silver bullet for these problems, but what I can say is that we've all been working on these water infrastructure issues, cataloging it, working through asset management plans whenever possible with communities to help them prioritize where they're spending their dollars. We see our role, of course, as regulator, implementer of statute, but then also when you all make determinations about appropriation, those are dollars that flow to communities, that help communities make these improvements for their people. And so happy to work with you on both the combination of policy and funding.
Well, and it seems in true oversight, if we want to examine how do these problems that are so serious and so impactful to human health occur, we have the responsibility here in the legislature because, one of the things that we do is control revenue sharing to local communities and local units of government. And I can tell you, having come from local government where I served for nearly 20 years, the state revenue sharing has declined dramatically over that time period, which...
Representative, we're trying to keep the discussion onto what specifically happened here. All right? We're not an appropriations committee. So please keep your comments. We're trying to figure out what happened and ways to prevent this in the future. Go ahead.
Revenue sharing is something that happened, Representative Johnson, Chair Johnson.
With all due respect, revenue sharing is not why it took 3 years for this problem to be elevated to this point. All right? I do have a question, if I may, regarding that. How much I know we've done like a $10 million down payment with this recent budget. How much did the department request after this was first identified in 2018? How much money has been requested for Benton Harbor specifically for lead lines? And so it'd be the 2019, 2020, and 2021 budget.
I don't have the full breakdown of all the requests in front of me, plus all the dollars that have been given to Benton Harbor, not only through the state, but also through our federal partners. They just received, I think it's $6 million from the feds to start the lead service line replacement. I don't know what you have in your head. We'd be happy to get our budget team in here to answer that question more robustly.
Yeah, we don't really have a pot of money for lead service line replacement. We've been advocating for that. We did help the city apply for, in 2020, for an EPA grant was out there. We helped them apply for that and write the grant to get a $5.6 million award from EPA to start. And they're starting that first batch of lead service line. I think the first 100 is under contract to be removed, but we're obviously going to escalate that.
Yeah, and more robustly, this is why the department has been working really hard with other state departments to put the My Clean Water Plan out there and talk about very publicly all the investments that are necessary for drinking water infrastructure and for clean water infrastructure. You know, we see our potholes. We don't see these problems with the lead lines or service lines or any other type of water infrastructure because it's hidden from us.
Okay. Being told by my budget team that there was not a request in 2019 or 2020 for Benton Harbor lead lines just this past year.
There was a $500 million request for the My Clean Water Plan,
Right, but
which
that's not
includes
specific
drinking
to
water.
Benton Harbor. If there's a specific problem saying, hey, the lead levels are very high, we have to help, there should be a specific ask to the appropriations for Eagle, I think, when we're talking about
You all
that.
did appropriate money through the Clean Water SRF to go to drinking water systems, and the Booker Amendment, which we asked you to approve and you did under the My Clean Water Plan, allows for dollars directly to disadvantaged communities. That's the intent, is for these dollars to reach communities where they're needed.
I understand that, and that's for a more larger holistic program, but when you identify a very specific problem like Benton Harbor, should there not be a specific request in the budget saying, here, we have about 3,000 to 5,000 lead lines that need to be replaced. We're having problems. It's not working. We need direct dollars there. Like we had in this last budget, there is a directed appropriations to Benton Harbor specifically for this. There was no request in 2019 or 2024.
Just the high-level My Clean Water request for $500 million. That's correct.
Representative Riley.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions, probably for Mr. Oswald. You mentioned that once you put in a certain blend in the water for anti-corrosion, it takes a while for that to, what's like the standard a while? How long is that?
It really depends on the system. You know, these systems that get returned very quickly, you know, a lot of the Great Lakes Water Authority customers, they have the advantage of corrosion control. We're seeing some of them have action level exceedances now, but those pipes have already had corrosion control, and it's a lot quicker to return. In a system like Manchester or Benton Harbor, where there has been no corrosion control, it can take 1 to 2 years and even longer for those pipes. We call it passivation, that coating to form. But it depends. It's very dependent on the water chemistry and what the distribution system looks like.
So when you see high levels then and you want to take action, then it seems like, wow, do the residents know at that point that this may be a long ongoing process?
The Safe Drinking Water Act requires us to put out public education. Every time an action level is exceeded, the system, and that's every 6 months in Benton Harbor, has to re-notify the public and put out public education.
Okay, and then real quickly, where's the water sample at the faucet and where else?
Under the lead and copper rule, the samples occur in homes at the faucet. They can occur at a kitchen sink or a bathroom sink.
And how much influence does having galvanized pipes have in there that have lots of corrosion?
Yeah, galvanized pipes, we consider those to be lead pipes if they were downstream of a lead component because, yeah, they do pit, and that lead particles that come off that lead component can deposit in that galvanized pipe. So we consider galvanized pipes that are downstream of lead or have been downstream of lead, we consider those to be lead service lines.
How old are most of these homes?
I
Like
don't
average?
know that.
We're talking about 50s, 40s, 30s?
Yeah, I think you're
they're
talking
built?
older homes, but
Yeah,
it's-
so I imagine a lot of these pipes are just they're not like pitted. They are like full of corrosion and the pipes. That's typically what happens in galvanized pipes.
Yeah, if they're galvanized. We don't see a whole lot of galvanized in service lines. It's mostly lead, which doesn't pit. It's great material, doesn't pit or corrode. But yeah, inside the home. Yes.
Because we're talking about fixtures. I would think it's not so much the fixtures as it is all these pipes that have accumulated lead over the years.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to piggyback off something there. The public education, how are residents made aware? Because we're hearing from some saying they had no idea. Is there something directly mailed to them, or is it just posted on a website? How are they made aware?
In Benton Harbor, these were mailed out. Now, they did miss an entire zip code that they served. We gave them a violation for that the operator in charge missed. So they did miss a portion of their customer base, but we corrected that. But every time there's an action level exceedance, that public education has to be mailed out or posted or put with the water bill. And it also has to go in the consumer confidence report every year to let them know.
Okay, and one brief follow-up. You mentioned the operator in charge. The petition alleges that the operator held an F1 certification, which was not high enough to actually operate the water system. Is that true or not true?
That is not true. That F1, there's two certifications we look at. One is to operate the water treatment plant. The other is to operate the distribution system. The operator in charge had an F1 certification, and he was operating the water treatment plant. They had a contractor on board, F&V, who had an S1 certified distribution system operator. So yeah, that is correct that the individual that was running the treatment plant did not hold the proper S or distribution certification, but they had another person that did.
Thank you for clarifying that. Representative Wozniak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming in and testifying. Couple questions. Do you deal with private water supplies at all?
We deal with anybody that falls under the definition of a public water supply, yes. So it doesn't matter if they're publicly owned, privately owned, an authority, a co-op, anything like that. As long as they meet the definition of a public water system under the Safe Drinking Water Act, we oversee them.
It's the same scrutiny for the lead pipes and the other chemicals in there?
Yes.
Do you test for other things other than just lead? Do you test for arsenic? Do you test for PFAS? Do you test for nitrates?
We do.
Okay, so you mentioned environmental justice. Now, here's my concern right now. We're concentrating on Benton Harbor, but what about Hamtramck? What about Kalamazoo? What about Muskegon Heights, Owasso, Ionia, Marysville, St. Louis? What about all these other cities? We have the same situation, don't we?
We do. Hamtramck just had an action level exceedance. They have a lot of lead service lines. Unfortunately, they are a customer of Great Lakes Water Authority, so they have the advantage that they're getting some corrosion control treatment. We're working with Great Lakes Water Authority right now to re-optimize their corrosion control treatment based on what we've seen in the last several years under this new testing regimen.
Okay. And my last question is, do you trust the results from the tests?
I trust that the results are accurate, that go to the lab, that the lab is accurate. Now, you know, it's problematic how those, whenever you're having citizens take samples in their own home, there can be issues with that, and we've seen that. We've got to validate all these, which is, my lead and copper unit spends a lot of time validating every sample that comes in to make sure it was properly taken, the stagnation time was met, and make sure nobody's gaming the system to try and play it. So.
And we've added some additional communication measures to try to help people understand how to take the tests when they're taking them themselves. So the team's done videos, they've done paperwork, they've done we know that we need to reach people more. We have more work to do to reach people. We understand that. And so we're trying to use all those different avenues. So, you know, some people like videos, some people would rather read it. You know, there's materials that go in the box when people get the box at their home and show them how to do it. But we're always open to more ideas about how to do that better.
There's a great website out there, My Lead Safe, MI Lead Safe. That
what is
has
it?
These videos on there.
What is it?
Michigan.gov/MI Lead Safe.
Yeah,
Lead Safe. Google
MI Lead Safe and it'll take you there.
Okay, so is it still a possibility people could fudge testing?
You know, I wouldn't want to speculate. I think it's, since the new lead and copper rule, we've clamped down on that. I think we've got better control, but certainly is there a possibility a homeowner, because the way it happens usually in systems, they get homeowners to participate in a lead and copper. They drop the kit off. They tell the system, they educate that consumer how to take the sample. The consumer does it on their own. So they'll tell them when the sample's ready to be picked up, the system will come back out, pick up the sample, and you just have to trust that the homeowner took that sample properly.
Okay, last question, and then back in terms of environmental justice that you talked about, do you have, and it might be premature for that too, do you have any plans for these other cities that are in trouble?
Absolutely. I mean, we're working with Hamtramck now. We're working on a town hall to go in there with our health and human service counterparts, again, to to promote that public education material, to tell people what they can do to control any exposure, limit any exposure to lead, how to properly use filters, how to identify a filter. All that information will be out there, and we'll be working with the system to look at, and again, they get their water from GLEWA, so the city itself isn't treating the water, they're buying it from GLEWA, so we got to work with GLEWA to re-optimize their corrosion control treatment.
Great, thank you for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So when you analyze a single corrosion control, like the Keras 8600, how many doses are required to analyze that?
For normal lead and copper testing in a community?
Per the federal and state rules.
It depends on the population. For a small city, under 10,000, I believe it's 30 samples. But Benton Harbor was kind of over that, so we decided to leave them at 60. We didn't want in the middle of an action level exceedance to take them from 60 to 30. That's not the way we want our data flow to go. The more data we've got, the better. So it depends on the community. The larger communities have to take 60 samples. That sampling period can be reduced. Although under the new lead and copper rule, it's harder to do that. Before it was like every 3 years. However, once you have an action level exceedance, you go back from reduced monitoring to what we call full-scale monitoring, where you have to do it every 6 months and you have to do your full chart, which in Benton Harbor's case was 60 samples.
Okay. Were any of the blends deemed optimal?
We initially, that 70-30 blend, we put that out there as an optimal blend, yes. That was our first estimate of an optimal blend, but we wanted to continue testing because the only way you can tell that is by testing. And it wasn't working as fast. We certainly, nobody is satisfied that Benton Harbor's had these 6 action level exceedances. So it wasn't as optimal as we thought it was, so we redesignated the 90-10 blend, and we're seeing that work a little better right now. The problem with the 70-30, and the reason that we went with that, is you've got these old water mains, and the problem with orthophosphate is it binds with iron, and all of a sudden you have discolored water going through your system. That poly portion of that binds that iron up and doesn't let it discolor the water. So you've got to be careful about what you do and not take one problem and cause another problem.
Okay. In your opinion, should the state be declaring a state of emergency for Benton Harbor right now?
Well, the governor issued the executive directive last week for an all-hands-on-deck approach, and,
It's not a state of emergency. There's two different things there. You think that's fine, or should we go the step further, in your opinion?
I do think that's fine. I think we have an all-hands-on-deck approach, and we're working together to support the city.
Now, hindsight's 20/20, right? And everyone makes mistakes, but if you could go back, what changes would you have made at this point, knowing what we know now? What could we have done differently starting back in 2018?
I don't have full understanding. I don't have full situational awareness right now to answer that question. That's certainly something that our team's thinking through and working through all of our materials, but I don't have an answer to that question today.
One of the things with this corrosion panel, we're going to take a look at the Benton Harbor data and review it and do after action on what we did in Benton Harbor, what worked, what didn't work, and what we can do better. So we've assembled this corrosion panel. I'm going to chair it, and we're going to look at Benton Harbor in particular to see, okay, here's the steps we took. What could we have done better? What could we have done more efficiently? So that's part of that.
Yeah, we should set that up. So I asked the team to put this corrosion control panel together a couple of weeks ago in order to do that review and to include national experts, EPA experts, university experts to complement what we understand. I shouldn't say to be additive to what we understand, so that we can learn more, because we know the state of the science here is always evolving, and we want to make sure that we have as up-to-date information as possible. So that panel will start meeting as quickly as possible.
Okay. And I want to be respectful of your time here, so one last quick thing. When do we expect to see the next lead level report out of Benton Harbor?
Their next sampling period finishes up at the end of December. So we're monitoring those results now.
Okay. And at this point, we're just going to continue. I mean, should the residents of Benton Harbor expect they've got to use bottled water until those lines are all replaced? Is that kind of the assumption they should be under right now?
No. EPA is doing a filter study to make sure that the filters that we think are highly effective also work with the Benton Harbor water chemistry, and we hope to have those results soon.
What's our timeline on that?
That's a great question. The team was meeting this morning with that conversation. I don't have an answer.
Days, weeks, months?
I'm hoping it's weeks.
Okay. All right. Thank you guys for your time.
Yes, sir.
Really appreciate you coming here and answering some questions. A lot to try to learn. It's a complicated issue, so thank you for taking the time this morning.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. We do have, who wants to speak briefly to this, Bishop James Atterbury. I believe he's here. Said he thinks he can do his testimony under 5 minutes, so, and then we have to get to the mayor. So thank you for being here this morning, sir.
I do have a prepared statement I'd like to read, and then a few comments after I read this prepared statement. Every person in Michigan deserves access to safe drinking water. Every community deserves a system that delivers safe drinking water to its residents. With Governor Whitmore's executive directive, it's clear that the state is at an all-hand-on-deck to make sure Benton Harbor has the support it needs, including continued access to bottled water and an aggressive timeline to remove all lead lines in 18 months. The governor has already worked across the aisle to secure funding for this important work to begin. But now, we need the legislators to deliver additional funding. To be exact, $11.4 million to make sure we get all the lead out of Benton Harbor residents' homes to ensure safe drinking waters for our community, and we will not stop until the job is done. We know that Benton Harbor is not alone. Like so many cities across America, Benton Harbor is facing infrastructure crisis that is decades in the making. This is what decades of interaction and continued disinvestment in our water infrastructure looks like. This is an all hands-on-deck moment for the government and all levels of this community. It will take all of us to work together, rowing in the same direction, sharing the same goals of getting the lead out of Benton Harbor and protecting the health and safety of all of its residents. Let me be clear, I'm here today not to talk about how we got here, but to talk about where we go from here. I woke up this morning, no water. I left my wife of 50 years of being married. She couldn't bathe, she couldn't wash her teeth, she couldn't brush her teeth, she couldn't do anything because we have no water. I'm asking you, as leaders of our state, to look at this as if it was your community, if it was your home, if you woke up in the morning and had no water, no way to bathe or even flush the toilet. Yes, I couldn't even flush the toilet last night because I had no water to do that. I know that many people can say, Benton Harbor neglected itself. We hear that all the time in poor communities. I'm tired of listening to that. We are all human beings. The good book says, do unto others as you would men do unto you. It is time for you. Actually, it is your moment. It is your time. As leaders, I've been where you sat. I sat here in the state, over at the state parole board for 80 years. I served as county commissioner. So I have a little understanding of legislators and work that you do in the government, but I need you to take for a moment this time to look at human need, human support, to support people like yourself and our community to take care of this business. I believe the governor is doing the best she can. Our mayor is doing the best. I support both of them, but we need you now. We need the leaders to stand up and say, we don't have time to figure out how we got here. We need to know where we're going. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, up next we have Mayor Marcus Muhammad. Thank you for being here this morning. And if the individuals that are up with you, if they could introduce themselves as well.
My name is Alexander Little. I'm the Assistant City Manager in Benton Harbor.
Good morning. My name is Chris Cook, and I've been the city's consultant engineer for close to 30 years.
Marcus Muhammad, Mayor of the City of Benton Harbor. I was elected as a city councilman in 2010, served as the Mayor Pro Tem to 2012. I was reelected to the City Council and was eventually elected as Mayor of the City of Benton Harbor in 2016. However, I am the first mayor to be elected post-emergency management under the Home Rule Act 279 of 1909. I want to read something, and I just want to, Mr. Chair, thank you for the invitation to be here today. I took what you call a bird bath in a container about this big because I had no water. My family, we understand disasters, so we happen to have gallons of water for emergency purposes. We could have, appeared via Zoom, but my church training kicked in, where it's better to be asked up than to be asked down. So when you all asked us to come up, I wanted to be in person. I want to read something to you since the media has really been very instrumental in this whole saga. This is from 2019, April 6th, from my local newspaper. And this is just excerpts. When contacted by phone, Muhammad said his number one goal was to repair the streets now that the city income tax money is being collected, which started January 1, 2018. In another 4 years, we'll be in a position where we really can see a substantial result, he said. In addition, he wants to work with the state and federal government to receive more grant money to replace lead service lines in the city. Last fall, the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality issued an advisory about higher than acceptable levels of lead being found in some of the city's drinking water. Further investigation found that most of the lead was from water pipes and fixtures on homeowners' sides of property lines. The city is using an almost $300,000 state grant it received in May 2018 to replace about 40 service lines to houses. But Muhammad said more is needed. So at that point, we were about $300,000 to fix this $30 million problem. Now we are working with state and federal government. My good friend Fred Upton and the EPA, we stand at $18.6 million. And your benevolent bipartisan agreement with Governor Whitmer brought us to that point. So we have $18.6 million. We've already started the work. However, I would petition the government, state government, that we need 11.4 minimum to be able to say in 18 months, hopefully, that the city of Benton Harbor is lead-free. So with that being said, again, thank you, and I relinquish the floor.
Thank you for being here in person. That really means a lot to us. I know you've got a lot going on. You talked about Representative Upton with the grant there. I think it was a $5.6 million grant through the EPA that was announced last year. Where does that stand? Where are we at with that?
So we received that money in our treasury June 7th of 2021.
And how long is that going to, I mean, how many pipes can get fixed with that one? How long is that going to take for those pipes to get fixed? What does that look like?
So I have my capable city engineer sitting next to me, Chris Cook. If I can defer.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So the expectation is that 888 lead services would be replaced with the EPA grant. There are currently 100 of those under contract to a local City of Benton Harbor contractor to begin that process. And we plan to have another 200 and some out before year end to try to keep that moving along.
Okay. Let's say you're saying you need about 30 million. Let's say you had that all today. How long would it take for all those lines to be replaced if you had the money today?
So in speaking with the Director of Procurement, Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist, as well as Governor Whitmer, they have placed an aggressive goal of 18 months. In fact, he told me that he would like to stand with the governor, and hopefully Representative Wenzel and State Senator Losado could stand with us as well at the end of next summer and say Benton Harbor is lead free.
And you think that is possible to reach that goal? If you had the money, you think that's a realistic goal?
I think with collaboration, coordination, cooperation from everybody. Yeah, I know it's a Mount Everest undertaking. However, I think that if we work together, we might be surprised.
Okay. I had this discussion with the department. I kind of want to talk to you about this as well. This started 3 years ago. We've had 6 reports in a row where the lead levels are high, and yet it seems like this just ramped up a lot in the last 30 days. Should we maybe have done things different 2 years ago? What, in your opinion, what caused things to ramp up seemingly out of nowhere here? The timing does look strange, right? It's right after this petition was filed that all of a sudden you're seeing a substantial change in how this is being messaged. In your opinion, what caused this change? Was it the petition? Was it something else? And should this have, should we have told residents you need to use bottled water? Should we have said that 2 years ago, in your opinion?
So if you look at the chronology, you'll find in 2018, after we tested 30 homes and detected that 8 exceeded the 15 parts per billion, we notified those 8 homes as well as the 22 homes that did not exceed. We notified Benton Harbor area schools, Boys and Girls Club, and we began to distribute water, working with the Barron County Health Department. We held a press conference, and we started the process of informing the public. However, as the mayor, and as I mentioned in my statement, that I knew that $300,000 was not enough to address this problem. So we have worked with DEQ, which is where it started, and now Eagle, to try and procure as much funding as possible. As we went down that line every 6 months, we found that out of 108 homes, 87 homes tested below the 15 parts per billion, 19 exceeded it. But what really got the attention, I think, of the mass media and others was the most recent lead levels, where I think the governor and others said, until we can test every home, given that we know the lead service line problem, we need to send in bottled water because we cannot afford to have senior citizens and residents exposed to lead in the water.
So you recently issued an emergency, or declared an emergency. Should we have maybe done that earlier? Now, I mean, it's hindsight. I understand, it's not fair to go back here, but looking at it, trying to see, is this something that when you have lead levels at this level and we've been through multiple corrosion treatments, is there maybe a point where we say, we maybe should have declared emergency sooner? Or do you think this was the appropriate month?
Well, I think that after finding, that 8 homes exceeded it, we thought that at that time, to alarm the public, to begin to send out notices, provide filters and bottled water was a start. And we wanted to follow the process in working with Eagle, as well as DEQ, to try and find out how many other homes. But it reached a certain point to where the city council passed a resolution to say that this is a local emergency. And I do have in the packet for you the course of action that we plan to take in response and in support of the governor's executive directive.
I'm still struggling trying to understand why the state of emergency now. I understand when we first get the information, you say, all right, maybe not on day one. Maybe we say, all right, there's 8 homes, we need to investigate a little bit further. We make sure people are notified. Let's try our initial treatment to see if we can get this under control. But we've had 6 reporting periods in a row, and the last one came out, I think, over a month ago. Nothing, really. It was just status quo. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, now we're hearing all this action has to occur. So I guess I'm just trying to wonder, as we know we have other communities that may be facing this issue, should they be thinking to themselves, how many failed tests do they need before they declare that emergency? I have a hard time understanding why we're waiting 3 years. I get where you're saying when you get that first report, maybe that's not the right time. We have to try the preventative measures. But I think there's got to be somewhere between when you get that initial report and 3 years. 3 years seems like too long, and nothing really has changed in that 3 years. Am I missing something here?
So between the 8 and 19 homes over 3 years, and the lead exceedances in the most recent testing, that's what triggered it. But I will say, Mr. Chair, the motive operandus of the council in declaring the emergency was to get the attention of the state government as a whole. Because as the mayor, I know, and my motto is I can of myself do nothing. I need the council, as the governor needs the state legislator to act. Because at the end of the day, we can declare a state of emergency, but without the money and the resources, nothing can be done.
You've got our attention now, and that's good. I think that's what it just kind of reiterates my concern. Why was this really brought to our attention 3 years? Had this been declared a year into it, perhaps there would have been a funding request in the 2019 budget or the 2020 budget. Instead, we don't get it till this last one. And as we're trying to figure out with other communities that are going to probably face these same issues, I don't think their residents should be waiting 3 years before the state takes action. 3 years before we're actually sure that, 3 years where they're not being told directly, hey, don't drink this water. Right now, your residents are being told that. Hopefully, they're able to get the bottled water. But how many people didn't think it was a big issue because there wasn't an emergency? There wasn't a lot of coverage, and so you had children maybe potentially drinking unsafe water. We want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. I don't know. I'm going to keep thinking about that. I think there's got to be something in there that maybe would be a better timeline. But let me keep thinking on that. I know Representative Young has a
Mr.
question.
Chair, if I can just say, I would have responded to this invitation 3 years ago if you would have asked me.
We weren't aware of this 3 years ago, and I think that's the problem is this was never elevated to us. And so it's elevated now because of the actions, right? It's all over the place, and I'm glad we're having this conversation now. I wish we would have had it 2-3 years ago. And that's what we're trying to figure out going forward. How do we make sure that that does get elevated? Because it didn't happen here. But Representative Young?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you all so much for being here on today. This is tough. This is tough, and particularly, you wake up to a water main break, and now we have all that on top of what we're already dealing with. So again, thank you for that. I just have a couple of questions for you gentlemen on today. I'm real clear about what the ask is. So our ask right now is approval of this $11.4 million to help us reach that 18-month goal, correct?
Absolutely correct.
I'm just a little bit concerned about it because we're always trying to manage expectations. And it's all hands on deck, and it's an emergency, and we got to get it done. But the one thing that we've heard since I've been on this committee regarding COVID is the workforce and how there just aren't enough people to get any of the jobs done. So perhaps you, Chris, could, or somebody can help ease my concerns that we'll have enough people to get the work done in the 18 months.
I believe we'll be drawing contractors from all over the state to come in and help us get this done, and we can break it into manageable chunks so that those different contractors can do to the maximum of their capacity to try to help get it done as quickly as possible.
Okay.
But it will be yeoman's work.
Yeah.
And the director of procurement, he assured me that that all hands-on approach of working with contractors will be in full force. But, you know, I would just ask, and I know this is not the Appropriations Committee, the governor asked for $20 million, and it was truncated or sliced to $10 million. So, you know, why wasn't that cut from the gate?
I'll just step in. It's a $10 million down payment to get things started. We're still having negotiations with the supplemental, so I wouldn't say that we're not fully funding the 20. We got the 10 million out the door as we further these conversations to see. So I think sometimes that's what we do in legislatures. We get the money started as we try to understand the problem, because it's really been brought to light very recently.
Right, because if we recognize the urgency, then the response should be in kind. So if you know that this is an urgent 911, then cut the check. I don't know if you listen to rap music, but there's a rapper named DJ Quick that said if it does not make dollars, then it does not make sense. So this problem must be and needs to be solved with revenue. And if you don't like DJ Quick, the Bible says money answereth all things. So we need the money, Mr. Chair.
When did you first recognize the urgency of this situation?
Well, that's with my first statement. And I said in 2019, April 6th, I'm gracious for the 300,000. Actually, it was 284,000. But I said then that I'm committed, and I'm even more committed today, to working with the state, number one, federal government, number two, because we need more.
Did you recommend to the governor or the department back in 2019 that you needed more money?
Well, Governor Whitmer did not come in until January 1 of 2019. So, you know, my concern at that time was the unfunded mandates that we were getting from Eagle to increase staff, buy chemicals. Of course, it was COVID at that time, so the political environment and what was going on in Lansing, you know, it was some challenges, I think. So
when did you first elevate to the governor or the department the need for the funding?
And when I stated in April 6th, we need more money.
April 6th of what year?
2019.
Okay, and that was to the governor or the department?
That was to Eagle.
Okay, so you told
or
Eagle,
DEQ.
DEQ or Eagle in 2019.
That the 284,000 is not enough.
Okay, thank you. Representative Riley?
Thank you. So overseeing the water treatment plant, you've got a joint board of commissioners between Benton Harbor and St. Joseph's, right?
No, sir.
You do not? Oh, okay. Who oversees the water treatment plant? The board of commissioners does not? There's no board that oversees that?
No, sir.
Okay, I thought somehow you had somebody from the city that was involved.
So we do have a water department director, and then we have a contractor, as stated before, that does the actual distribution and overseeing it. And Mr. Cook, if you want to speak to that.
I would just say that there may be some confusion about the wastewater plant. Has a joint board that consists of folks from City of St. Joseph, Benton Harbor, and some other member communities.
Okay,
The Benton Harbor Water Plant is owned and operated entirely by the city of Benton Harbor, so it's under the purview of the mayor and commission and the staff that work there.
and is that commission, in the commission that works there, what is that commission called?
There's not a commission that works there. There are staff that work there. The commission I referenced was the city commissioners,
Okay.
who oversee all the operations of the city.
Okay, and you guys are fully staffed, correct? You have no vacancies in those positions?
So that was one of the recommendations of DEQ in 2018. But if I can just rewind, in 2010, under the first emergency manager, after he attempted to sell the water plant and found out that he could not, then he cut over half the staff and eventually fired the director. So when DEQ came in 2018 and said, wait, you need to increase the staff, you need to hire a contractor, I was cross-eyed because on one hand you had a state official to deplete the water labor, and then another official coming back saying you need to increase it. But again, I signed the administrative consent order immediately because my whole aim and purpose was to provide clean, safe drinking water and be in compliance with the act.
So over this 2 to 3 year period, do you believe the residents of Benton Harbor knew that the water was unsafe to drink? Were they properly notified, or is that just kind of a recent change? I mean, were they drinking the water, in your opinion?
So from what I do know, some residents were drinking bottled water. Some residents, the tap water. So I think it was a mix.
May I ask, for over these 3 years, were you drinking tap water or bottled water? If I may
So my home was one of the 89 tested that tested below the 15 parts per billion. Actually, mine was 0. So, I still use it for brushing teeth, for cooking. However, I've always drank bottled water because I don't like the chlorine, the fluoride, and the other chemicals that's in it.
Okay. Well, we do have a hard break here because we have session at noon. So I do appreciate you coming in today and trying to enlighten us a little bit more what's going on. We want to make sure that we can help you, make sure this doesn't happen in other communities as well. So thank you for being here today. With that, we have to adjourn here because we're hitting a deadline here. Go ahead, briefly.
Yes, we need you, this body. Oversight is so critical because out of oversight comes solutions. So I'll be looking for a report, hopefully from you all, on what your recommendations are moving forward for Benton Harbor and for other communities. May I submit this packet here?
Absolutely. Thank you. And we do intend to make some recommendations, so thank you.
Thank you.
With that, the House Oversight Committee is adjourned.